building a better Bay Area for a safe and secure future. This is ABC 7 News.
Hi there, I'm Kristen Z. Welcome to our daily program called Getting Answers. Today, we're digging into defunding police. It's a chant you've heard from protesters across the country. Post your questions on our Facebook live stream, YouTube Live, or check out our Instagram stories to submit a question. On a local level here in the Bay Area, San Francisco says it's in the process of reallocating some funds and directing it to the African-American community in the city. Now, Police Chief Bill Scott says he is open to it. San Jose Mayor Sam Liccardo says no to defunding, but yes to reform, including banning rubber bullets to disperse crowds. California Governor Gavin Newsom has not commented on defunding police, but has ordered the state's police training program to stop teaching officers a neck hold that blocks the flow to the brain. And of course, a lot of people are still confused over what defunding actually means. Senator Kamala Harris, as you know, a potential vice presidential running mate for Biden, got into an exchange over this issue with Meghan McCain on The View yesterday. Take a look.
I don't think there's any rational American right now who doesn't think that we need to take a cold, hard look at reforming our police. But there was a video that went viral over the weekend of the mayor of Minneapolis being yelled at, saying, yes or no question, are you for defunding the police? So I'm going to ask the same question the protesters asked him. Are you for defunding the police?
How are you defining defund the police?
Well, I'm not for anything remotely for that, so I would ask the protesters the same thing. But I assume and again, this is something that is new to me, I assume it's removing police, and as Congresswoman Ilhan Omar said, bringing in a whole new way of governing and a law and order into a community. And my understanding, again, this is something that has just come into my understanding recently, is that you would not have police officers like this Minneapolis City Councilwoman said, that I would be a place of privilege if someone broke into my home and I wanted to call the police.
So, again, we need to reimagine how we are achieving public safety in America. And to have cities where 1/3 of their entire budget is going to policing, but yet there is a dire need in those same cities for mental health resources, for resources going into public schools, resources going into job training and job creation. Come on, we have to be honest about this, that there is actually not a consensus around this, because if there were, we would actually see smarter distribution of resources in our country.
All right, so redistributing resources in our country, Senator Kamala Harris's point there. But is that enough? What is the real impact of defunding? And what does defunding really mean? As our show title suggests, we are getting answers, and today we're getting them from a respected retired judge of the Superior Court of California and the former independent police auditor for the city of San Jose, Judge LaDoris Cordell. Welcome to our show.
Thank you so much.
All right, Judge Cordell, so you perhaps heard that exchange between Kamala Harris and also Meghan McCain. Defunding does seem to mean different things to different people. To you, what does it mean?
Well, there are really two things happening right now in policing. One is the reform, and the other is just reimagining policing. The defunding means different things to different people, but I think basically what it means is taking the police, keeping them as they are, but taking money from their budgets to use for other things to address issues in the community. So money could be utilized in drug treatment programs. It could be utilized in domestic violence prevention programs. So taking money out, using it, different resources within the community. I think that's basically what defunding means. And it's a hot topic because police unions are absolutely opposed to taking any money away at all. So that's one part. So that's the reform part, as well as you mentioned earlier, chokeholds, rubber bullets. These are all things that are really designed to make policing less aggressive, less harmful to people. But there are other people who are saying we need to do even more.
So let me ask you, for the folks who suggest let's just take some of the resources and divert them to community organizations, right? Why use the word defund if that implies to other people who are listening that you want to take away all resources? Is there an alternative word that could help clarify what they mean?
Yeah, so I do think it's not a well-chosen word to explain it. and I'm not sure what the word is, one word that says take away money from a budget or give them less money. But there is the group of police abolitionists, and they're the ones that are saying, take all the money away, take it all, just dismantle policing as we know it and put in something new. And that's what people, I think, tend to think when they hear defund. Take all the money. If you take all the money, there's no more police. Mm-hmm. So I think it's not just a good word. What they mean is take some of the money away from the budget to use in other resources in the community.
All right. As you said, there are two different things we're talking here, diverting some resources and disbanding completely. I want to explore each of those options in a little more depth. But first, disbanding, because Minneapolis, the city council there, is indicating that that's kind of what they want to do and move into a totally different model. They've pledged it. Of course, that is where George Floyd happened. Give people a sense for how that would look. Can you help people imagine, what are the different models they could replace it with?
Sure. So in Minneapolis, they have not come up with the model. They're thinking about it, so they're not immediately going to disband. They basically said they have the intention to do that. So we really right now maybe have one big example of disbanding, and that was in 2013 in Camden, New Jersey, where the entire police department was shut down. Everyone was fired, all the officers, even the chief. And then the city decided to reconstitute the police department. So people had to apply to become police officers again in Camden, but there was an entirely new approach. And the approach was to have community policing. And what they meant by that was officers out of their cars, walking in communities, getting to know people. And there was a dramatic change in Camden. One example, before this, there was 16% solve rate for murders in Camden. And then once this change happened, where it was disbanded and put together in a different fashion, the solve rate jumped to 61%. And that's just one of the things. So that's one example. Another might be to say, just completely change the model. So we don't have officers with weapons patrolling all the streets. Maybe there are community people who are deputized to deal with nonviolent kinds of things. I don't know, because this is a very new thing, but that's probably, these are some of the ideas that are being talked about. Mm-hmm.
I think when you mention that if you do have that kind of police, I should say community presence, and I know some cities, some departments use the word community policing. But when you have that trust that's built up, when you have the mental health, the social services angle, I think it resonates with a lot of people that, okay, that could bring down the amount of violent crime. But to the extent that you still have a little bit of violent crime, how do you address that then from a public safety standpoint if you don't have a quote unquote police department?
Right, and that's an important issue. So obviously, if somebody's breaking into my house, the first thing I'm going to do is call 911. So you want to have people who are trained and who can come in and protect you. So that is the challenge to those who say they want to disband. So they have to have something, because there are going to be people out there who do not have good intentions, who are badly behaved. But there are other things such as neighborhood squabbles or traffic stops. There are things that perhaps community could get more involved in, and perhaps officers who are trained to use their weapons properly would maybe be the backup. I'm not sure. But again, this is important because we've never been at this place in this country where we've even used the words of reimagining policing in communities. Right now, police, at least in urban settings and in communities of color, are seen as occupiers. Is seen as people to be afraid of, to be fearful of. So that is what the big complaint is, and that just has to change. So people are saying, instead of just these reforms, maybe we need to look at the bigger picture. Mm-hmm.
I do want to ask you if you've seen any studies that might point to, if we have fewer guns on the streets possessed by citizens, could that potentially impact whether or not we need police, or whether police may be less inclined to use their weapons? Have you seen studies?
Well, we know, for example, that in other countries where the gun culture is not like it is here in this country, that police don't have the big issues that we have here. So, I mean, you've touched on a very controversial issue. We've even had the president in the White House say to people, Second Amendment. He's always asserting that and telling people that, keep in mind, we really need this gun culture and we need our guns. So America is really unique in that area. So do I believe that there would be less violence and there would be fewer killings if we had a change in the gun culture? Absolutely. So how do you change that? Well, you start first with the law. And the United States Supreme Court has basically interpreted the Second Amendment such that everybody has a right to have guns without any prohibition. I think it's wrong, and I'm hopeful that one day the court will realize they're wrong and reverse that decision.
All right, Judge Cordell, we're going to take a short break on the air right now, but I want to continue this conversation with you over on our live stream platforms, in which we're going to start to dive into what does reform look like. So join us over there on Facebook Live, and we'll be right back on air.
We are in commercial break.
All right, Judge Cordell, I want to continue the conversation for our Facebook viewers. So Mayor Sam Liccardo of San Jose, the city in which you were the independent police auditor, is now saying no to defunding, but he's saying yes to the end of using rubber bullets, for example. What do you think about that? Is that a good start? Is that enough?
Okay, so all of these are, rubber bullets, chokeholds. These are reforms. These are steps to take. But here's the big thing. We thought, for example, cell phones and body cameras were a game changer. But what happened in Minneapolis? An officer kept his eye on George Floyd's neck. He looked up and saw that he was being recorded. And what he did in response was to press his knee even harder into George Floyd's neck. So, and he did that because he believed there would be no consequences. So you can have these reforms. I'm not saying we shouldn't have them, but there needs to be a cultural change in policing. And it's not going to happen, in my view, by having bias training. We had bias training, and we still have these incidents of excessive force. So my concern is, sure, do these things. These steps might make things safer, but there are 18,000 police departments in the United States, and they each have their own culture. So it's fine to take these little steps, but I believe we're sidestepping the bigger issue. The bigger issue is the stereotyping of people of color and the systemic racism that pervades our institutions in this country, policing being one of them.
Mm-hmm. All right, so if culture is the number one thing to change, and I will say, you pointed out the bias training, and we did do a story, I don't know if you heard about it. There was a man who actually works with San Jose police about bias training that was injured during the George Floyd protest in San Jose. Did you follow that one?
Absolutely. Okay. Yes, he's African-American and he was shot in the groin.
Yes. All right, we're going to come back on air in about 5 seconds, so hang on to that thought.
7, 6, 5, 4.
We are back now with retired judge of the Superior Court of California, LaDoris Cordell. When we were in break and we were on Facebook, we started to talk about how to change police culture, because you can do things like say no more rubber bullets, like San Jose Mayor Sam Liccardo is now saying, or like Governor Newsom saying, let's not train new officers to use chokeholds. Okay, but how do you go about changing the culture, right? What needs to happen in terms of the training?
Right. So what you just recited are reforms. They're things that will maybe make people safer, no rubber bullets, no chokeholds. But there's the bigger problem. These are baby steps, but there is this culture in policing. And one example, the officer who had his knee on George Floyd's neck actually looked up and saw someone was recording him, and his response was to push his knee even harder into the neck of George Floyd. So he did that because he didn't believe there would be any consequences for his conduct. That's the culture. So to get a cultural change, we've got to take a deeper look. And it isn't, in my view, these reforms. They're important to just kind of, if we're going to keep policing as it is. Mm-hmm. But I have a real concern. We have this big cottage industry has now developed with bias training. So has it worked, in my view? No. So what it has done is, maybe there are some officers who get it, but there's still officers using excessive force out there who have undergone the training. So there has to be something more. So I'm hoping that people understand that it's this issue. This is why people are in the streets, not just policing. It's systemic racism that has been with us for 401 years, since 1619, that has permeated every institution in this country, including policing. Mm-hmm. So looking at policing, in my view, we need to completely reimagine, kind of dismantle things and see how we can put them together to do two things that can protect community and also result in people not being harmed by those who were supposed to serve and protect us.
Mm-hmm. So, one way to do it, obviously, and it's on the table, is to dismantle that system. Another is to say, what if you become part of the system? And, to that end, do you encourage people of color, young people of color, to consider going into policing or law? Or do you think if they go into that system, the system changes them and they get acculturated because they cannot fight the system? What do you think?
Well, I think it's both things. You can reimagine policing and be involved in the system. I don't see them as two separate things. And if you take me, for example, I decided to become a part of the system when I became a judge. So for 20 years, I was a part of the system. And I know, for example, the criminal justice system, and I don't even like to call it justice, but that system is broken in so many ways. And yet I determined that if I'm going to be a part of it, I'll do all I can to try to make it better. So absolutely, it is important that there be women, people of color who are involved in this process, who are trying to make things better. We need more women. We need more people of color to be prosecutors, to try to, again, fix the broken system. And again, now I'm talking about just the criminal justice system. And that's, there's separately talking about policing. So I don't see them as two different things. If you dismantle, you take it apart, then you figure out how to put it together in a better way, in a way that better protects everybody and keeps everyone safe. Mm-hmm. And we all should be involved in that.
I was going to say, and do you think there's one model that would fit all, or do you think each city with its own demographics and history would have its own model?
So you bring up a very good point, and I tend to believe that because there are 18,000 different police departments with their own turf, their own jurisdictions, that no, there isn't like one thing. But I will tell you, there are things the federal government can do, which is to say, we don't want rubber bullets. We don't want chokeholds. The federal government can't order these 18,000 separate departments to do anything, but they can give them incentives by saying, we will give you grants or we will take away funding if you're getting any from federal. There are ways to get these various departments to do these kinds of things. And these are just major. It's common sense. Why would you not want to prohibit chokeholds? Mm-hmm. I can't come up with a reason.
All right. We have about a minute and a half left. And I do want to shift gears a little bit because I want to touch on a park. This week, you're also in the news because you've put your name to a petition to increase access to a park in Palo Alto. And this is not unrelated because it is part of the social equity conversation. So tell us about that park.
Sure. Foothills Park is probably the only park, maybe in California, where access is limited only to residents of Palo Alto. So that means you, if you don't live in Palo Alto, President Obama, Anna Eshoo, our congressional representative, cannot go to Foothills Park unless you're accompanied by someone who is a Palo Alto resident. It is exclusionary and it has criminal punishment. So if you try to access it and you're not a resident, then you can be charged with a misdemeanor and prosecuted and convicted. So this has been the case for years and years. And there's some of us in Palo Alto have been pushing and pushing to say, stop this. It's basically saying we don't want outsiders to come into our little enclave. That needs to stop. It's all part of, again, what people are protesting about, this whole system. And I believe it is linked directly to racism. Keep out Black people from coming in from East Palo Alto, keep out Latinos from coming in from San Jose to ruin our park. I mean, I really believe that was the mindset. So we have got to change it. We're on a roll now, and we hope that the city council will have the courage to say, this is ridiculous. We need to stop and lift the restriction on access to the park.
All right, Judge LaDoris Cordell, thank you so much for opening our eyes in so many ways in this short conversation. Really appreciate it. Hopefully,
thank you so much.
You and I can take a walk in that park someday very soon.
There you go.
Take care.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. We'll take a short break, but when we come back, we'll talk with ABC 7 News contributor Phil Matier about new federal charges tied to another person inside San Francisco City Hall. All right, Judge Cordell, if you're still with us, we can actually chat for a couple more minutes if you have a couple more just for
sure. I can't hear you now.
Okay, so great. Amanda on Facebook wants to know, how does defunding end police brutality?
It doesn't. So that's the short answer. So if you take some money out, you still have the culture, and that's what has to change. So if there's a culture there, and there are officers, and by the way, in policing, in California, there is very little transparency. So you don't know if an officer who has stopped you for a traffic violation has had 10, 5, 18 complaints lodged against him or her. You don't know if that officer's been disciplined, because in California, that information is not available to the public. That needs to change.
Transparency is really important. This may sound like a rhetorical question, but I think it's worth mentioning. Diane Arnold says, are you aware of how hard a job is being a police? I think as the independent police auditor, you're probably quite aware of that.
Oh, there's no question. For 5 years, I worked with San Jose PD. I didn't work with them. I was an independent police auditor, but I was in contact with them all the time. I'm aware of the hard work that they do. There's no question. But at the same time, people say, well, leave policing alone. It's just a couple of bad apples. No, that is not what is happening. If you looked at the incident in Minneapolis, there were 4 officers, all 4 of them caught up in the culture. They're probably decent, good people, maybe 2, 3 of them. And yet they were part of this culture that did not stop a murder that was happening in front of them.
Thank you. Judge Cordell, we are out of time for today, but we'll keep the conversation going. Take good care.
Thank you. Thank you.
And we are back. The corruption scandal at San Francisco City Hall just got deeper. 3 more people are being charged with federal crimes. They include the director of Mayor Breed's Office of Neighborhood Services and a veteran employee of the city's Department of Public Works. Chronicle insider and ABC 7 News contributor Phil Matier joins us now to break down these new charges. All right, Phil, so walk us through the new charges and how they're all tied to the guy at the center, Public Works Director, former Mohammed Nuru.
Well, it's pretty basic. It's almost like a friendly family situation, if you want to put it that way, only it turned out to be not too friendly for the taxpayers or the FBI. What we're talking about is Mohammed Nuru and his longtime girlfriend, Sandra Zuniga, who heads the city's Fix-It department. Now, what Fix-It department is basically, sort of like with the Department of Public Works and other agencies, they go around and fix problems in the neighborhoods. You got a problem with the sewers or this or that, they help fix it. Well, she was also fixing a few things for her longtime boyfriend, Mohammed Nuru. The FBI says that she laundered about $135,000 in payments from contractors doing business with the city of San Francisco through her bank accounts, and then used part of the money for herself, for Mohammed, and also to help pay for a vacation home that Mohammed Nuru had up and still has up in Colusa County. And what we're talking about here is the DPW sort of head making friends with contractors, doing favors for contractors, checking out city contracts to them, getting them inside information on city contracts. Let's say one of them was for running an asphalt company on the port property that would supply asphalt for the city. And in return, not directly necessarily, they did favors for him. And the FBI says that is called bribery.
Okay. So Nick Bovis, right, the owner of Lefty O'Doul's restaurant, didn't he get some sort of deal from prosecutors? What's he going to bring to the table?
Well, Nick Bovis was one of those who was arrested earlier with Mohammed Nuru because the feds initially got onto Mohammed Nuru over a plan that he and Nick Bovis, a restaurateur at Lefty O'Doul's here in San Francisco, were attempting to bribe conspired to bribe an airport commissioner to try to get a restaurant lease out at the international airport. They're pretty lucrative affairs out there. You know, they make some good money. And Nick Bovis was trying to get it for him him and a couple of other people that turned out to be undercover informants for the FBI. Now, Mohammed Nuru has been cooperating with the feds and with the San Francisco City Attorney's Office. Nick Bovis was brought in. He was charged. We don't know exactly what he said, but the next step were these arrests, and they seem to be stemming from the conversations and the evidence that the feds picked up between 2014 and about 2018. So this is all part of an ongoing, and it's kind of like, you know, the fingers of a hand spreading out. It starts with the picking up of Mohammed Nuru and Nick Bovis for the attempted conspiracy to bribe the commissioner, and then it just expands into past contracts that they're all sort of circling around and connecting the dots to, and it could result in some healthy time for all of them.
Well, how high do we think this goes, and how wide does it go? I mean, already there are hints from the prosecutors that there could be more names and more people come forward now.
I think it's going wider because I went through the court documents on this, and from what I've heard around City Hall, that Mohammed Nuru did favors for a lot of people and got a lot of gifts for it. He had one contractor who was part of this investigation, a female contractor down in Hillsborough, who allegedly gave him a $40,000 Rolex watch. So how commonplace was that? How many people were going to City Hall, knocking on Nuru's door, getting favors in return for gifts? But the question is, as you pointed out, it goes further, but does it go up? Does it go into the mayor's office? Does it go into other parts of city government? Now, in some ways, it's already touched in the mayor's office, because it turns out that about 20 years ago or so, Mohammed Nuru actually dated now Mayor London Breed when she was a City Hall worker and staffer. And recently, in recent years, he also helped her out when her car got in trouble and gave her about $5,000 worth of helping her out with rental cars and trying to get her car fixed, which is not the best look for the mayor, and that's what brings this all up. Was there anything else going on? So far, no proof of anything else.
All right, but stay tuned. We'll see.
It's a soap opera, and there's always going to be another chapter. Stay tuned for this one.
Starring the city of San Francisco. All right, thanks, Phil. We'll take a short break, but continue this conversation on the air. In the meantime, you can read Phil Mateer's columns in the San Francisco Chronicle every Wednesday and Sunday. Be right back. All right. Hey, Phil. So for our Facebook friends right now, as we live stream, I want to ask you, how does this affect Mayor Breed, if you will, in terms of her ability to do things in City Hall? I mean, there's a lot on her plate right now between what's happening with police and COVID, and just to have all this scandal swirling around her and corruption questions. What does this mean for her mayorship?
It's all part of the drama of San Francisco, Kristen. You and I have been around here enough years. It goes back. Just about every mayor we can think of has had some sort of, okay, was it cronyism? Was it buddies? How did it go? That sort of rolled back on him. Ed Lee had problems. Remember, the FBI was investigating some of his commissioners who said that they could get him audiences with donors. You gave them money, they would get Ed Lee to help you out. The FBI took a look at that, and some people were prosecuted on the state level for that. But, Kristen, what we have here is this came up, and initially the mayor wasn't touched. Then it came out about Mohammed Nuru helping her with her car, and she found herself surrounded by this. And then the pandemic started, and it all went away for a while. And now it's resurfaced as the pandemic subsides. So it's one of those things that's just going to be around for a while. And how it plays out with her, it's one of many chips in what's going on at City Hall right now.
Also, when I was talking to Judge LaDoris Cordell moments before you joined us, we were talking about how, look, it's not just a few bad apples, it's a systemic issue, right? So you can almost look at what's happening in San Francisco and say, do we have a systemic issue here?
Oh, one way or the other, yes, we do, and we have had it for some time. The number of people actually running City Hall and around City Hall is pretty small, and they've been there for decades, and friendships develop, and sometimes those friendships cross the line. It's not new. It is systemic. It happens in San Francisco, possibly because it's so small in some ways that everybody knows everybody else, and things happen.
Things happen for sure. All right, thanks, Phil. And we are back. That's going to do it for today's edition of our interactive show, Getting Answers. Hopefully you feel like you got some answers when it comes to defunding police departments and what that actually means. We'll be here every day at 3 o'clock on air and on live stream answering your questions. So join us every day. Have a good one. All right, Facebook friends, thank you for joining us today. Hope you had an eye-opening experience as I did. I'll see you tomorrow.